So I'm Sue Stevenson. I am founder of U-Turn Anxiety. Reason I got into that is because in uh, I had a realization four decades into my life that I discovered that I had been experiencing anxiety for 4 decades, almost every day. Well, not almost every day, 100% every day. And I had no idea. And I actually thought there was something wrong with me, and I just kept it a secret. Um, yeah, it was pretty full on when I had that realization. And the reason I had that realization is because here's the thing. I think children are our greatest teachers. So my daughter was challenging me, and I was finding parenting my daughter very tough, and she was finding life very tough. And I was trying everything because I was a very well-intentioned parent, yet nothing seemed to be working. So we got to a stage where we actually got to a crisis point, and she was grappling with life and, really feeling like she was a lost soul, and she was angry and tumultuous and rebellious. And I was angry, stressed, confused. We were both not doing well, and our relationship was falling apart too. So I decided that I needed to do something. So I sought help. Help wasn't very helpful. I haven't shared with you before, I don't think, but I say there's helpful help and unhelpful help. And I would say that I didn't receive helpful help. So I'm quite old, I'm 60. So back when my daughter was 16, and I just took my daughter out for lunch yesterday because she's turning 40. So that's a long time ago. So when she was 16, we're talking about here. So so I went looking for help because I did not want to lose my daughter, and I did not want to lose my relationship with my daughter. And I began to realize she couldn't change herself. I was the one that needed to step up and change what I was doing. So I tried, and I didn't get that helpful help that I needed. So I decided to look for it myself and figure it out myself. And that was hard. It was really hard. And back then we didn't have the internet to just pop on and Google and find out things. And there were not as many people in the industry. No one was even talking about anxiety. I discovered it. No one suggested it to me. So it wasn't a thing. So then I became a woman on a mission. And I worked extremely hard on learning more about myself, learning about her, learning about the dynamics of what was happening. And I'm not going to say I personally just all myself, because it came from my daughter as well, but I was able to restore our relationship and begin to rebuild our lives in a positive way, and hers too. And she ended up coming out the other side and is just a beautiful human being. She always was a beautiful human being, but she was someone who was struggling, but now she's thriving. So it's a wonderful thing. She's a mother of 3 beautiful children. She's doing an amazing job as a parent. She's learnt so much, and I believe that I wrote on her card yesterday that she has been my greatest teacher, because she led me to improving myself. The challenges that she was having led me to reflect upon my own life and understand me and understand her. And it, yeah, I'm actually really grateful, although at the time I just was so angry with her and distressed. And now I'm just incredibly grateful that she put me through that journey. She took me on that journey because I've learned so much, and it's given me the opportunity to learn about the importance of connection in relationships. And it's given me the opportunity to learn about what anxiety really looks like, what it is, what it means. So yeah, she was 16, so that's about 24 years ago. I started that journey. So the key for me is that I don't want other parents and kids having to go through the 24 years of all that learning. I can shortcut it for them now because I know exactly, I can pinpoint exactly what's going on when I hear a family story or I hear what's going on in someone's life. I can pinpoint, this is what it is, and I can support them straight away because I want them to get helpful help. I don't want them to be mucked around with a health system. No offense to the well-intentioned people in the health system, but there's a lot of people who actually don't know how to support people who are anxious. They're what I describe as missing the point. So I'll talk more about that, but that's really my backstory, along with being a teacher, working in well-being. I then put myself into the wellbeing space. I qualified myself, and I learned all of that because I just started to eat it up. I loved learning about, you know how we love learning about our own story. We love learning about ourselves. So it helped me to do that. And then I thought, far out, there's so many people that need this information. They need what I've learned, and I can save so many people from years of suffering and pain. And that's what I'm super passionate about, because we've just got too many people that are suffering unnecessarily because they're not getting the right help.
And I would want to add to that that I truly believe there's many of us who are suffering in silence and who maybe don't know what they don't know, as the saying goes,
Yeah.
right? Like you
Oh,
could be
100%.
struggling with something and it makes your body feel overwhelmed and you start to feel like the symptoms of the anxiety, right? Where you feel hot, you feel itchy, you feel confused, you feel, oh my God, where am I? One of my friends recently, he was going through this and he was trying to navigate and understand how is he going to overcome it because he started to be overwhelmed by negative thoughts, right? And
Mm,
he's a personality type where if a negative thought enters his mind, it takes him time to dispel it, right? Many
mm-hmm,
times you have to go through it. Like, you know how there's people out there that they're very prone to negative emotions. Like if they're having a bad day, maybe you and I could take maybe a couple of minutes to overcome it. We'll think of something positive. Where him and many others, they dwell on it. What did I do? Where did I go wrong? Oh my God, it's overwhelming. And he ended up in the hospital because his heart rate was increasing and increasing and increasing. And I share this story because it shows that if we're not understanding ourselves, or if we don't get an understanding or at least control over what is driving us to feel this anxiety, it can overwhelm us, right?
oh
So
yeah.
for you, when you were working on yourself and when you're trying to help others deal with the anxiety, parenting is such a big source of anxiety.
Mm-hmm,
Am I going to be a
mm-hmm,
good parent? Are my kids going to grow up to be successful? If they're
mm-hmm,
bad kids, what does that say about me? Right?
mm.
When you're dealing with that, how do you try to quiet that voice that is maybe second guessing everything that you're doing?
Oh, okay. You ask really good questions. I do love them. um, yeah, okay. How do we quiet that voice? Um, is it okay if I just wind back a little bit? Because I love the story you shared there. So all humans have a negative bias. It's our natural, protective, primitive instinct to notice fear or danger or problems so that we can rectify them. So our old caveman primitive days needed that. They needed us to be alert and be on guard because that was any life-threatening danger, we needed to act. So we've all got that in us still. We've got that primitive part of ourselves. Some people, I'm going to say, are better at being more alert, noticing negative things. And the theory goes, the science behind this is that every populations are meant to have different personality types. We're meant to have the people who were able to alert the tribe of danger. We also need the people who are not going to spend all their day worrying about that because they need to get on with doing other things for the people. So there's value in being someone who can notice things that are going wrong and who can alert people of things. The trouble is we can get caught in a rabbit hole of noticing negative things, a dark hole where we can't get ourselves back out of it because all we're doing is noticing things. And this is a very primitive part of our brain. I think it's been described as 500 million years old, like, millions of years old. So maybe it was 5 million, I don't know, but a lot of years old. So we needed that though, but it's old and it's a primitive part of it. So when we are aware that this is the primitive part of us coming up, and we're not living in the same world, the same way back then, when we're aware that our body is interpreting, our mind and body is interpreting it as danger, then we can do something about it. And we can go, oh, okay, wait a minute. I know my body's telling me I'm not safe. My mind's telling me I'm not safe. But actually, am I? And if we can get to that stage where we can reflect and ground ourselves by taking a breath, calming our nervous system, and then beginning to move out of our fear protective part of our brain dominating us and move into our prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, sensible, smart, the part of our brain, the intelligence part of our brain. If we can activate that and activate our executive functioning, we then have the ability to be rational and think it through. But if we get caught up in that old primitive part of our brain, it's irrational. It's because it's simply protecting us from danger. So no point trying to ask it to recite a poem or anything. No, I haven't got time for that. I've got to save my life. So that's why children and other people can't listen or hear any logic because they're in survival mode. And so what's happened is it's translated into our life now. We actually have got we live in a very overstimulating world. And we are now being presented with a lot more information, pictures, images, noise, things to worry about. And we've got a lot of sophistication and complexities in our lives. So there's a lot of brains, as to be expected, are getting mixed up with, is this a life-threatening problem or is this something I can manage and I can handle and I can work through? So having that, being aware that this is my primitive part, it's in control. We've either got it in control or I'm in control. and my prefrontal cortex, I'm in control. And having that ability to be able to get ourselves in the driver's seat, get back into us being in the driver's seat, takes some skill, takes some learning, I share loads and loads of things that you can do to really, really get back to grounding yourself, creating space between what we think is the problem and us responding to it. Rather than reactivity, we go into responsibility. Responsibility meaning the ability to respond rather than react. So if we create that space between us, that's super, super important. So that's how we get overwhelmed with negative thoughts, because we fall into the rabbit hole of that primitive part of our brain. And we're thinking, oh, but what if that happens? And what if that happened? And and we're talking ourselves into the fear. And we continue to talk ourselves into the fear. So when you said that some people are prone to negative emotions, yes, some people are prone to noticing negativity. But in a way, it's kind of a good thing, because they're the ones who used to save the tribe. And they're the ones who are in the meeting with some big corporate organization and say, did anyone think of looking at the stats on blah, blah, blah? Because remember last time when we did this and that happened? And they're the ones who can actually often point out a risk. And they've got this incredible skill. I'm going to put myself in this, we have this incredible skill of being analytical and being able to weigh up a situation. If you're in your prefrontal cortex, you can utilize this beautiful skill. You can also utilize this beautiful skill because we notice negative emotions and we notice when people are a bit off. I can feel it. I mean, I know everyone can feel, but people who are prone to anxiety actually have a high level of they've got an emotion detector. It's much more sensitive, and they're sensitive to their own emotions and they're sensitive to other people's emotions. So they pick up how other people are feeling. They pick up the energy of other people more than others. Not saying others don't, but they pick it up more. So they feel it more. They feel the problem. And they notice it. However, you can again utilize this. So now I realize, I'm actually really good at co-regulating other people, because I notice when they're feeling a bit off, when they're feeling a bit trouble, when they're feeling like they need something. I now realize, because I'm out of the primitive part of my brain and I can worry about others or I can support others, I can pick up on it really quickly. Whereas other people might go, I didn't even notice that. I didn't notice she was unhappy there on the, I didn't notice her state. But people with an anxious temperament actually do. So they're really good. They've got a gift and they don't realize it.
So,
So,
Sue,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. How does that then impact adults and children who possess that?
Yeah, good question. Well, most people, like myself, think there's something wrong with them. They think there's something wrong going on in their body when that feeling and the negative thoughts come up. They tell themselves. So you said they begin to go into self-doubt and all this negative thinking. We start looping. You can start looping in negativity and go into that self-doubt trap. And self-doubt is the opposite to self-love.
I like
So,
that. Self-doubt is the opposite of self-love.
yeah, so self-love is the antidote to self-doubt.
So if I were to take that and maybe apply to, let's say, children versus adults, in theory, it would be an easier journey for adults to cope with self-doubt because they would have self-love, where children maybe still have to figure it out? Or is it that both adults and children still have to figure it out to be able to cope with it accordingly?
Totally. I think it's the second one because there's so many adults that haven't got a clue how to love themselves truly. We can get our hair done and our nails done and we can go and have a bubble bath or something, but they're all temporary things and they're external things. Self-love is loving yourself here, in your heart, in your soul. It's truly loving yourself. It's feeling comfortable looking at yourself in the mirror. It's feeling comfortable praising yourself, acknowledging yourself, accepting compliments because you love yourself and you deserve that. You're worthy of that. So self-love is very different to what a lot of people think it is. So I would say majority of adults don't really understand what self-love is. And I don't think they're very self-loving because it's more self-judgment and self-criticism, and that's all self-doubt. And that's there's a lot of that dialogue and narrative that goes on because we compare ourselves to other people and we do all of that stuff. So that's I believe that parents do it just as much as kids. And I believe that this is the whole secret to changing the generational patterns that are being passed on. Because if we don't address this with the adults who are raising the children, they're going to pass their thinking patterns, their behavior patterns onto their children, and it's all going to continue. So this is why I work with adults, the adults who are supporting kids, so that they learn what this child needs to break this pattern so that this child can start thriving. And now that child's going to be a thriving parent and is going to raise their child a different way and not
I
get
look,
caught up in this self-doubt loop, you know?
yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out because when I look back at my childhood, as you're saying that, the source of love initially was coming externally from my parents, my family members. Like they're the ones who were surrounding you with love, or they're supposed to be anyways, right? There's
Yeah,
many parents that don't.
yeah,
And I had to figure out how I wanted to be loved for myself first because I wasn't getting it in the way that I wanted to from my
yeah,
parents.
yeah,
Now, as an adult, it's like the total opposite. I get enough love from myself, and the love I get from others is secondary and it's a complement to the love that I have. My question, I
that's
guess,
good.
thank you. Perfect, right?
Well done.
The reason why I say that is because I had to go through something to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how many children would just be able to feel their way through it until adulthood. But that's where you would come in and you would help the parents to show the child how to nurture it within before looking for it outside. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Am I
yeah,
understanding
it
correctly?
does. Yeah, it does. And look, it sort of comes back to how can you meet your child's emotional needs if you don't know how to meet your own? How can you teach your child how to love themselves if you don't know how to love yourself? So, can you teach a kid a new language if you can't speak the language? No. So, we have to start with the parents. We absolutely have to, or the educators. Whoever the child is spending a lot of their time with, they need those adults to feel firstly comfortable within themselves, because if they don't feel comfortable within themselves, they're giving off anxious energy and that's rubbing off onto the child. So they're transferring their energy onto the child. So that child begins to see that as the normal. And then they're anxious and everybody's, a bit on edge. You think about the number of families that are so caught up on the mouse wheel of stress, the busyness. I call it the busy, it's rushing syndrome. We're all rushing and we're not stopping and pausing to be present and loving.
Yeah, it's like we're all in a constant movement but we're not really going anywhere. It's like sitting in a rocking chair. It's just something to do, but you're not really going anywhere. And that's where
Yeah.
I'm wondering for the children now and the adults, because it starts with them, you're taking them at a stage where they've been a certain way for so long,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you have to change that train of thought or that thinking pattern, that habit, the moral compass. You're changing this. And in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
sense, they're becoming like a new person.
Yep.
But as you're doing that, what happens to the like what is a child going through in your opinion when they're seeing the transformation of their parent from one way to another, but it's happening in real time to them?
What happens for the child? Oh, I'll tell you what happens. I had a couple the other day, and their daughter, I met with their daughter as well, which was lovely. And I'm going to say, most of the time, I don't need to meet the kids. So every single family that comes to me, they're coming to me because their child's got a problem. Their child is the problem in their eyes. That's what they're thinking and believing. And they expect me to be working with the child. And I don't. I start with the parents. And in fact, in most cases, I'm very happy to work with kids. I did it all in the school system, but I realised that that was pointless if I wasn't working with the parents or the educators of this child, because it's a very narrow approach. Our health system, certainly in Australia, our health system is kid with problem, send kid to therapist, kid will get therapy, and then, oh, all be sweet, things will start to improve. But the parents don't get any support. They don't change. They don't change what they're doing, their thinking patterns, their behavior patterns. So the kid comes home, even if they've got the best therapist on the planet, they come home to the same dynamics, the same pattern. And even though these parents can be the most beautiful, well intentioned, loving parents, they can't see. They've got blind spots. We all have blind spots. They can't see the pattern they're caught up in and how they don't understand that what is going on could actually be increasing further anxiety in their child. So everything can come undone. And I just saw this over and over. Therapy session, all comes undone in minutes. Mum or dad just need to say something that is an old way of speaking before they've learnt what the way I encourage them to speak to their children. They could just say one or two comments, and then the kid's like, and then boom, we're just back. We're back in it. And no one knows, no one realizes. So unless we support the parents, they're the critical part of this. And so every parent that comes to me says this, and then they say, "Oh, when will you be helping my child?" And I'm, maybe it just depends. I'm open to it, but let's see how we go with this first, because I'd rather you had the skills, I'd rather you had the tools to be able to support them, because you live with them. What's the point of a therapist relying on a therapist when you live with them? Let's skill you up so that you can support your child every single day when all the everyday stuff's coming up. I want you to be able to deal with this. I don't want things to get really bad and then you go, oh, shit, we better ring a therapist. Oh my God, and get them to fix our kid again. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And the whole health system, in my opinion, is missing the point, because they're focusing on the child going to therapy, getting therapy. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. So I'm not opposed to that, but I am opposed to it if we're leaving out the parents. So we've got to support the parents as well, so that they can support the good work that the therapist is doing and build on that. So, but we don't have to. I've found that the kids don't even need to see a therapist most of the time anymore. So the other day in my session, I met with this girl, and this family's had absolute deep crisis. The daughter has had suicide attempts. They've had serious issues going on. And when they found me, they'd had a whole team of medical professionals working with their child trying to fix things, and nothing was working. And these parents were just despairing. They were on 24-hour watch. Both of them had to give up work to be round the clock 24-hour watch for their daughter. So it was very, very serious. And they came, they were in the session with me, and they said, the, the daughters, they shared with me about a month before that their daughter said, "Oh, Mum and Dad, you might as well just get rid of all the other therapists. You two are doing a much better job than they are." That's what she said. And then in the session, I heard her say it again. And she said, "Yeah, you're doing a really good job." Now, this is coming from a teenager who was totally rebellious and was really fighting with the parents, and it was a struggle and didn't want help or anything. But I taught them how, because a lot of parents don't believe they can rebuild their relationship. Teenagers are difficult, rah, rah, rah. No, it's just about helping them to learn what opens the door and changes everything. And this is what happened in that family. And this family has completely transformed. And this young lady, and she's just the most beautiful young lady. She's gorgeous and she's happy and she's mucking about. And her dad showed me a video of them both going out and mucking about together. And that's the way that she's meant to be living. That was how she was meant to be living all along. But she got caught up in an anxiety loop. And those thoughts that it's like we get caught on the negative thought train, but we can hop off that and hop on the positive thought train if we want to. When we've got the skills and we know how. This is why I often say, we can turn anxiety around when we know how. We just need to know how. And that's
I
where I
think,
come in.
yeah, I think that's the missing piece when it comes to the parents. The parents are they're the head of that household. So why not
Mm-hmm.
start with them and get them to understand that you do have the power, the capability, and the
Mm-hmm.
desire to
Yeah.
change it. I think a lot of times when the focus is on the child or someone else in that household, we kind of do the parents an injustice because we're taking away power from them. We're saying that you necessarily don't have
Yeah.
perhaps what it takes to make the changes. So let's insert someone else to do it
Yeah.
versus let's say when you come in or another coach or things of that nature, they say, hey, let's all work together to help
Yeah.
you build the type of
Yeah.
home that you
Yeah.
want. So when you
Yeah.
help them build that, how does that feel to know that you played a role in reestablishing the love, the peace, and the harmony within their household?
And watching the child thrive, that's really cool. um, is oh, I get tingles already getting them. It's just that's what I do. That's what I'm here for. That is my purpose in life. I now know it's my purpose in life. It's everything to me. It makes me cry. I had a dad on Saturday, and he was finishing up. They're so ready to launch. They don't need me anymore, which is great. That's what I want. They don't need me anymore. And he just said, I just want to, just before, we finished up, he said, I just want to thank you. And he just started to cry. And he said, you've changed our lives. We had no idea what we were doing. We were so distressed. And how can you not get off on that? Like, that's so cool. I was so excited and I was crying because it's tears of joy. It's the best feeling, I believe, on the planet to be able to help somebody change their perspective and change their lives. So helping them change that perspective is huge. And he said, and every parent says, I've grown so much. We've grown so much. We're better people. We are now showing up as a completely different person for our children. And that's the key, because that's what the children needed. And they didn't know that, because so many of us adults have got all these little pockets of pain in our bodies that have been unhealed. So many of us have got this. We've been living as a different version of who we really are. So I believe that as much as we think it's us, when we rediscover who we really are, we realize who we can really be. And that comes from that place of love. So I say that we have three selves. We have our true self, we have our fear self, and that's when we're highly anxious and we're on guard and we're worrying about things. We get caught up. We fall into the trap of our fear self taking over. And then we have our false self. And our false self tries to mask how we're feeling and tries to cope and mask it all because we become perfectionists and procrastinators, and we're trying to live the way we should be living when we're in our false self. Does that make sense?
It does. It does because I believe that if we spend too much time in what we're not supposed to be, our false
Yeah,
self, then
yeah,
we can lose ourselves. Like we hear the stories that someone who
100%.
pretends so long, they've been pretending and pretending and pretending
Yeah,
that if you were to ask them who they are, they don't even remember who they are because they've been this alternate version of them for so
yeah,
long. I think
yeah.
that's what you're alluding to, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I masked my true self because I learned to mask because otherwise I would have just been stuck in fear and survival. And I probably would have been admitted to hospital because I would have been on, nervous system just on all the time. And as much as it was, it's like you manage it. And then you figure out, oh, if I do this and I keep people pleasing, and if I keep doing all of these things, then I'll keep on top of it. And and honestly, I had this motor running. I know your heart beats and you got your motor running, but I had the anxiety motor running all the time. So it was so normal. That was my base level. And then I had the mask around it. And then when I started to figure out all this stuff and I started to rediscover myself, the false self began to drop away, the fear self drop away, and now I'm so much more of my true self. And I know when my fear self shows up. Boy, is it obvious to me now. I know when my false self shows up. It's obvious. I can see it. It's like a friggin', beacon. It's like, oh, far out. That's how I used to be all the time. Like that's the old Sue. Shit. She needs to take a walk. And it just having that awareness of how I was being and who I was being helps me to reground myself and go, nah, no, self-love here. That's it. That's better. That's a better place to be in. Or, I've got this, or backing myself, or whatever that is, my true self, and showing people who I really am. I would never in a million years have done a podcast. Never in a million years. I was terrified of speaking in front of people. I became a teacher and had to train myself to even stand in front of the class. My heart was beating, I was shaking, I was sweating. It was I was thinking, what have I done here? I signed up for university to be a teacher, but I didn't do it for being a teacher. I did it because it was all about human behavior and science. Even back then, my true self was guiding me in that direction. But I didn't want to be a teacher because I was too afraid to stand in front of the class. So I had to overcome all this stuff there just to be able to stand in front of people. And then I had all these conditions and rules around, well, I can't teach in front of another teacher. I can only handle this, or I can only be in a class that I know, and blah, blah, blah. It was all just stuff, conditions that I'd set up around myself, believing that fear self was me. Wasn't. That was just a big story that I'd been telling myself and believing about myself. Does
So,
that
Sue,
make
let me
sense?
ask. It does. And as I want to highlight that because I think that's very important for people to understand. Because I could see someone who is stuck in this version of themselves that they don't necessarily like, but it's comfortable. And then it builds them
Yes.
up anxiety, right?
Mm.
And as we close, what's some advice you want to give to someone who wants to break out of that and start living and showing the world their true self?
Mm. I encourage them to get some coaching because it's fair enough. We don't know how to do it ourselves. We've given it a go and we're still struggling. If we're still struggling, we do need some support. So I do encourage them to seek out and get some coaching from someone who is getting results. I'm going to say that because I do believe that there's plenty of people that are doing a lot of talk therapy or you do not have to do trauma therapy for a year. You just don't. I'm able to flip parents, have a couple of sessions with them and dig deep, and they're just having these realizations about themselves. And we want to smash all of that and fast track them into rediscovering them who they really are. That's the exciting thing when they start to rediscover who they really are, not just show up as it, but rediscover it. And then they can show up as it because they've just figured it out. And one of the traps that a lot of people fall into, as you said, is that we can fall into our just doing our familiar because the brain always wants to conserve energy. So it always wants to take us back to our familiar, even if our familiar sucks. So many people will settle for the familiar because it feels hard to change. And yes, you got to do a little bit of work in the beginning. Yes, you do. But far out, it pays off because you get a lifetime of living an awesome life. In the long term, a little bit of effort goes a hell of a long way. But if we keep going back, if we're tempted, oh no, it's too hard, and we keep staying with our familiar that sucks, we stay in our familiar and it continues to suck.